Thank you. So first, I'd like to welcome the chair of our panel, Jenny Young. Jenny is the Head of Research and Innovation at Anglia Ruskin University, based in Cambridge. So I'll hand over to you, Jenny. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you so much for organising this. As you say, it's a very special panel because we talked about pupils at schools, thinking about universities in terms of teaching and getting degrees, which is really important, but not necessarily thinking about the incredible research that comes out of universities and the change that that research makes in the world. And everywhere you look around you, there is a change that research has made. So I'm really delighted to be here, really delighted to be chairing the panel. I'd like to briefly ask the panelists to just introduce themselves, a name and where you're from and what you do, and then we'll come back to you for your 10 minutes presentation in a moment. So I'll start with you, Aled.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so I'm Aled Jones. I'm Professor of Sustainability and I run the Global Sustainability Institute at Anglia Ruskin.
Thank you, Aled. And then to Angela, please.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dr. Angela Pine and I'm a lecturer at the University of Essex, but I'm also CEO and founder of a startup called Tenzyme.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Devereux. I'm Principal Lecturer in Astrophysics at the University of Hertfordshire, and I'm also Subject Lead in Data Science as well.
Thank you. And we have another panelist from Hertfordshire called Dr. Chris Stopford, and he's joining us shortly, hopefully. So we'll see him when he joins. But before I pass over to Aled, just to introduce myself, I'm the Interim Director of Research and Innovation at Anglia Ruskin University, and in that the job, I lead a team of people that help academics to apply for research funding, to deliver research, and crucially, to help them make an impact from their research through partnerships with businesses and other organizations, and through the networks that they develop. And I said that you see the impact of research wherever you look, and if you used Google in the last few hours or days, that is a spin out from a university in the States, from Stanford University, that is now worth $1.6 trillion. And that came out of academic research. Here in the UK, in Bristol, there's some, just very recently, a business was sold to a US company for $800 million, which is involved in the novel treatment of diabetes. Really, really important innovation and technology to come out into the world. But it's the big things like COVID vaccinations, but it's also things that make a difference to real people out in the world. So, for example, one of our researchers has done some very important work on the challenges faced by LGBTQ plus teachers and how they are disadvantaged in the workplace because of their LGBTQ plus identity. And through the work that Professor Catherine Lee has done in this space, there are now more teachers who are leading in their fields. With LGBTQ plus identities. So the changes that research make are perhaps smaller and less noticeable, and they're also incredibly big, incredibly important, incredibly impactful. So with that, I'd like to pass over to Aled to talk about his research and the change that he makes in the world.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. So I've got a few slides just to share to go through the detail of some of our work around climate change and net zero in particular. And just to give a sort of a very quick potted history of how I ended up where I am to start with. So I mostly did science at A-levels, and their sort of maths, physics and chemistry, and then did physics at undergraduate, and then a PhD in astrophysics. So interesting to hear the presentation of what more you can do with astrophysics if you stay in that. But I carried on doing, so I was a research fellow in astrophysics for a number of years, and then went via spin out and consultancy, and then back into university to look at sustainability and the challenges around sustainability. So what I was going to do is just talk a bit about our research at the moment and how we kind of see the world and the impact that research and innovation can have on the world. So hopefully you can now see my slides. So what we've been looking at as an institute is everything around net zero. It's a big topic of conversation within governments, and a big focus for businesses in terms of how to get to net zero. What does it actually mean for our economy? What does it mean for individuals? What does it mean for business decision making and government policy? And in particular, around 2023, at the moment, we've got the Conference of the Parties in the Middle East going on, talking about international policy. We've had some quite big events over the last couple of years around setting that international expectation of where policy should head. But just as a kind of reminder why climate change is important, why we're still thinking about this 40 years after the first set of conferences that were looking at climate change. It's all around impacts. We're seeing a lot more impacts around the world, around extreme weather, sea levels rising, ice melting, everything's getting a bit warmer. There's more energy in the system, and the impacts that it could have on individuals, on species, are increasingly being felt. So one of the bits of work that we try and do is to look at how people respond to these impacts. So whether that's crisis in food systems or in nature, or through floods or extreme heat, how do societies cope with some of these impacts? And that's an increasing focus for research across the university sector and across the business sector. And especially when you're looking at things like insurance, or investments where they're seeing more risk coming into the system. So there's a lot of work and an increasing amount of work around adapting to climate change and being able to cope with it. But what I wanted to focus on was still the mitigation. So what we're still trying to do to tackle climate change. And 10 years ago, giving this presentation, so that was 30 years after we started doing international negotiations. It was a number of years after the UK had got a Climate Change Act, putting in place legislation which meant we're supposed to be doing something about climate change. What we've seen over the last 10 years is a radical change in innovation and in the rollout of technology. And a lot of this starts off in university research. So just to pick out a few of the things that have happened. So over the last 10 years, we've invented a global solar industry. So 10 years ago, it was still fairly unusual to see solar PV on homes, on buildings, over large fields, anywhere in the world. But India, for example, we've seen solar installations increase by over 175 times. So that's a massive increase in solar. There's twice as much global wind power. Wind was probably the renewable technology that was doing the most 10 years ago, but there's now twice as much of it, and it's half as expensive. And so we expect that growth in wind to just carry on accelerating. We've invented a global electric vehicle industry. So 6 million electric vehicles have been sold over the last 10 years. And now that number is going to be a sort of annual figure of electric vehicles. So we've created this entire new electric vehicle industry, and 10 million people around the world work in the renewables industry, and that figure is climbing rapidly at the moment. So there's sort of change in what the economy looks like and what sectors look like was a surprise to a lot of people. And a lot of this technology, certainly when you look at battery technologies, solar PV, and novel technologies for doing renewable technology, that starts off in university laboratories and then is taken out through spin-outs and through companies. A lot of it is then also linked into behavior change and how people use technologies, and a lot of that knowledge is generated and looked at within university sectors as well. So that's what we've seen over the last 10 years. What we're going to see over the next 10 years is another 2 trillion per year being invested in technologies and systems that will solve climate change. There'll be a lot of work around how we change behaviors. So public transport, cycling, especially around walking more, around transport, how we develop communities so they're more local, so they have lower carbon footprints. There'll be a huge increase in jobs in green sectors and in renewable energy. And there'll be a huge increase in the skills needed to live in this new world, in this sort of transformed society and transformed economy. So all of that, universities are often in the forefront of doing and delivering. A lot of the 2 trillion a year will be in technology deployment, in building infrastructure, in changing societies and communities, and that will be informed by research within universities around the world. So this is being led by different governments. This was the UK government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, talking about the different technologies and things that they were going to invest in. This came out 3 years ago. What's happened since then is that in the US, we've had the Inflation Reduction Act being launched by the US government, which has changed the whole market for green industrial revolution. So the US has come out and said they basically want to lead the world after delaying quite a bit over the last decade or so. So they want to lead the world in technology development, huge investments in their university sector around technology and partnerships between business and university. The European Union is now trying to catch up with that, and they've certainly led the market in deploying renewable technologies and coming up with policies that help people to buy solar and wind. And a lot of that has been driven by the large programs that Europe have through their Horizon programs and their technology investment programs into universities to support, to coordinate and provide this really large base of research capacity across the whole of the European Union. So one of the projects I thought I'd mention just very briefly that we're involved with is this economics of energy innovation and system transition. So as I said, a lot of the money for this sort of this transition and this transformation of society goes into technology development. What we're more interested in is actually how people make decisions and what sort of decisions. So a lot of our research at the Global Sustainability Institute is around behavior change and policy decisions. So this EAST project is actually led by the University of Exeter and involves ourselves and Cambridge University and Oxford University. And it's looking at the information policymakers use when they're designing government policy and government regulation. So where people put in bans for different things, or they try and subsidize different technologies, there is a process, a decision-making process that a civil servant will go through to advise an elected member of parliament to say this is the sort of policy we think will work, or this is the sort of policy that will help technology to be deployed. So throughout that process, the way they use knowledge is very dependent on their understanding of different theories of change, on how economics works, on how business works, and universities try and help support them in making better decisions, or at least understanding how those decisions can be influenced, or if there's a bias in there. So this EAST project, that's funded by the UK government. So we've been looking at different sorts of policies and saying to the UK government, you know, you need to make choices around which technology to invest, which technologies does the UK want to be a world leader in. We can't just leave it up to businesses. We need to actually strategically decide and invest in those. It does need investment. It needs the public sector and government to invest in technologies, which will then bring their costs down. As we said, wind has halved in price, solar has decreased in price by factors of 3 to 10, depending on exactly what technology you're looking at. That needs early investors. It needs people who are willing to take risks to then create these new markets and create these new technologies. And it's important to think that, you know, the economy isn't something which is highly efficient and it's set for the future, something needs to change with the economy. So it's not just about adding a price on carbon and everything will be okay. Actually, a transformation in society means changing an awful lot of things, and understanding how all of that fits together is really important. So the sort of choices that we make within society and understanding why we make particular choices, whether we think business will solve everything or government will solve everything, or it'll be a blend of the two, those all influence our decisions, and it's important to understand those influences. So that's where also university research fits in to help people understand what their own biases are when they're making decisions around policy, as well as helping to invent technology, which is then rolled out. So that's me. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We're not on Snapchat or Instagram just yet properly, but we will be soon.
Thank you, Alid. It's really interesting as well to hear your reflections on the importance of influencing behavioural change, because that the kind of research into STEM doesn't happen in isolation of people using technologies. And so the elements around individuals and behaviours and policy is really important. We do have some questions already, but I'm going to pass on straight to Angela, and we'll pick up the questions at the end of each of the 3 or 4 presentations. Angela, over to you.
Oh, some technological issues there. Sorry about that. Okay, I have actually got some slides to share as well, so let me just put those for you. Okay, can you see those okay? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Angela Pine. I'm a lecturer at the University of Essex, and I actually work in the School of Life Sciences. I lecture in anatomy and physiology, cell biology, and cellular pathology. And obviously that's within biomedical science predominantly. But my research focus is actually on treating and detecting different cancers. And those cancers are normally ones that are caused by a virus called HPV, that I'm hoping most of you here will have heard of due to the HPV vaccination. Alongside my role as a lecturer, I mentioned before, I'm founder and CEO of a startup called Tenzyme. That company is actually developing a new test for HPV. I'm also a state registered biomedical scientist and a fellow of the IBMS, which is the Institute of Biomedical Scientists. And really, brief overview of my path to this career. I didn't start out in science. My A-levels, well, none of them were science. I was going to be a lawyer. Then that changed. After 10 years, I decided to go back to university, and I studied biomedical science. Then I did my master's and then my PhD, and yeah, became a researcher. So I predominantly work with a group of molecules that are called functional nucleic acids, and they're a technology that can be used as biosensors and treatments for cancers. So I'm sure that everybody here has heard of cancer, and quite often when we talk about cancer, we talk about or refer to different stages of the disease. So different stages really mean to us how serious the disease is. But in scientific measures or in healthcare, it's how far the tumour has normally progressed. So the earlier stages are, very earlier on, when it's quite difficult to detect at this stage because it's so small. And as you can see from the diagram here, you kind of get a tumour growing over time. So it isn't something that happened just overnight. You will be developing cancer, especially in terms of ones that are caused by viruses like HPV, over the course of something like 20 to 30 years. So it isn't something that, in this case, suddenly just arises. But as I mentioned, you have what's called early stage disease, which, if you think of it logically, if you can find a cancer really early on before it's had a chance to grow and to spread to other parts of the body, then the chance of being able to treat it is actually much greater, and the patient has what we call a better chance of a better outcome, which is that the cancer will eventually go away and be completely treatable. So if we can detect cancers at those early stages, then it's better for patients because they get better outcomes. It's also better for healthcare systems because treatments at earlier stages tend to be much cheaper and they're much easier. And they don't have as many side effects as well for the patient, less severe side effects. So normally, a patient with an early stage cancer that's diagnosed early can normally be treated and actually go on to live a perfectly normal and healthy life. Whereas if you're diagnosed at later stages, then you don't stand as much of a chance, depending on which cancer it is. And you may find that your actual survival after 5 years is quite limited. So for that reason, it's quite important for us to have good diagnostics where we can actually diagnose and test for different cancers and actually find them earlier. So that's one of the things that I do, is I'm trying to develop a test for a virus that is known to cause cancers. Okay, so for the first time in history, and I'm not sure that many people are actually aware of this, we have the power to eliminate the first ever cancer. And that cancer is cervical cancer. So it's obviously a cancer that affects women because only women have a cervix. And it's caused in 99.8% of cases by the virus HPV. So I'm sure I said at the beginning, I'm sure most of you have heard of HPV. And the reason for that is that hopefully you were vaccinated in around year 8. And the reason that you're vaccinated is to actually prevent HPV infections actually persisting in your body and then going on to cause what we call DNA damage and cell changes. I'll come back to that in a minute. So HPV is actually a sexually transmitted infection. It's the most common sexually transmitted infection, with 8 out of 10 of us actually having HPV in our lifetime. It doesn't have any symptoms, so it can be, it can go undetected and you can be completely unaware that you even have it. What normally happens is that your body and your immune system will clear the virus, so you'll fight it off naturally. So what normally happens with HPV is you become infected after skin-to-skin contact with another person, normally involving the genital regions. As I mentioned, if you're a normal, healthy individual, you will most likely clear the infection within 2 years. However, if you don't clear the infection for certain reasons, like you have an impaired immune system or you're in a more high-risk group, then that infection can actually go on to cause damage to your DNA. And then that damage can be replicated and it can cause your cells to grow out of control. And then that's when you actually develop tumours. So, as I mentioned before, late diagnosis of cancers is a problem. And I mentioned that if you're diagnosed late, then the chance of you surviving beyond 5 years can be greatly reduced. And that's basically what this graph here shows for cervical cancer. So we lose over 600,000 women to cervical cancer every year globally. And that's despite it being 99% preventable. So my aim is to develop, firstly, a diagnostic that lets us know when we have HPV infections, and secondly, a treatment for HPV. So, as I mentioned, end-stage cancers are very difficult to treat. So end-stage is where there aren't any further treatment options available to you. You've already had things like chemotherapy, radiation, and yet still the cancer comes back and there isn't anything else that can be done. So what cancer researchers like myself want to do is develop new treatments so people that are in this position end up having more options available to them. So I'm working on a gene therapy at the University of Essex that will actually target all the types of HPV that are known to cause cancer, and it will rid those infections from the body. So if you can imagine, if there's an infection in your body that's causing cancer, even if you treat the cancerous cells, if the infection is still there, then you still have something causing your cancer to come back and return. So our aim is to treat the actual underlying infection to limit the chances of the cancer returning. Okay, so I mentioned that I work with something called functional nucleic acids. For anyone that's keen on science, I'm hoping that you have all heard of DNA and RNA, and they are nucleic acids. So we're aware of DNA being sort of the molecule that transfers genetic material, and that's what we're used to it doing all of the time. But actually, DNA and RNA can have other uses, and they can perform other functions. So they can cleave. So I work with something called RNA cleaving DNA enzymes, and that's DNA molecules that can cleave RNA. And in cutting the RNA, what they do is they stop transcription and then translation, so you don't get a protein at the end of it. And that's quite important if there's a protein that's causing a cancer, for example, or in this case, my DNA enzymes can cut the RNA of HPV and stop the replication of the virus. So we know that functional nucleic acids actually work. There's already a gene therapy in clinical trials for a disease called wet macular degeneration. And the purpose of this slide is to kind of show you it's something that impairs your vision. So the pictures of the little boy there wearing the hat, as you progress from A to B, that's how macular degeneration progresses, and it's how a person with macular degeneration then starts to see. So you can see that actually they get this black sort of haze appear in the central region of their vision, and it eventually leads to complete blindness over time. So it's quite a serious condition. And they're now using an aptamer, which is another form of functional nucleic acid, to treat this condition. So we know that they can be very successful. So my company, Tenzyme, as I mentioned, is developing a new diagnostic for HPV. So HPV drives cervical cancer, and actually in 2019, the timing was a little bit unfortunate because it was just before COVID hit, but the World Health Organization launched an initiative to eliminate cervical cancer globally by 2030. And we want to sort of contribute to that mission really by detecting HPV infections. So currently, around the world, various countries have cervical screening programs, which I'm sure you would have heard of. Most people would probably have heard somebody at some point in their life referring to a lady having to go for her smear test. So that is actually the cervical screening program. In the UK, unfortunately, 1 in 3 women, when invited, don't actually attend their smear test appointment. And that means that HPV infections that could be picked up are going undetected. So they're being allowed to kind of sit and infect a person, cause the DNA damage, and go on to cause cancers. And that's why these cancers are then being detected quite late, because women are not actually going and attending their screening appointments. So there's many reasons why women don't actually attend. It's a very intimate examination performed by someone you don't necessarily know very well. People have a lot of issues around body confidence, and no one's particularly confident with a complete stranger having a look at their cervix. So we propose that if you could actually screen yourself at home for HPV, then far more people would actually take part in cervical screening. However, that isn't the end of the story. So on the slide is all of the cancers that can be caused by HPV. So it isn't just cervical cancer, it's a bigger problem. And our test would actually be able to detect HPV in lots of different regions of the body before it can go on to actually cause any of these cancers. And currently there isn't any test that can do this right now. So that's all I really wanted to talk to you about today.
Thank you, Angela. That was really fascinating and interesting to note how some of the subject matter in at school around, for example, RNA and DNA has such relevance as you start to progress into your sort of higher education and then your research career. And there's fundamental building blocks really of your research. So I think we're over to Carolyn. I don't think that Chris has joined us. So Carolyn from the University of Hertfordshire, over to you.
Thank you. I will represent the University of Hertfordshire for both of us. So I'm a principal lecturer in astrophysics, and I also teach a lot of data science. Data science is very related to astrophysics. We use a lot of data and analyze a lot of data in astrophysics. So I do research in mostly astrophysics, but a crossover between astrophysics and data science as well. So my story into research is in two parts, really. I started, well, I did A-levels in physics, maths and chemistry, and then I did a degree in physics. And then my PhD was in liquid crystal displays in the Department of Electronic and Electrical Engineering. And now I research in astrophysics. So I've been in various different roles. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the research I did a while ago and the impact of liquid crystal displays, and then talk a little bit about my astrophysics research. So sort of as examples of research. So I worked in industry doing research for about 20 years and was working on liquid crystal displays well before when we were just working on literally tiny little 4-cell devices and putting electric currents on and electric fields and seeing what happens to them and exploring them and trying to make displays that worked. At the time, liquid crystal displays as liquid crystal materials were quite new, and we're just developing looking at ways of how we could use them. So that so there was a lot of research on developing new materials, looking at how the materials work, looking at the electro-optic performance of the materials, trying to see whether you could make a usable device out of it. And in fact, we all know, I'm sure at some point we've had a liquid crystal display television. It was successful. And what that did is allowed laptops to be produced. So previously, we had big cathode ray tube TVs. So you could have a desktop computer with a cathode ray tube display on your desk, but you couldn't carry that around. They're pretty big, sort of heavy devices. So liquid crystal displays allowed a flat screen, lightweight display to be used with a computer. And that was the start of laptop computers. Also enabled mobile phones that we know now with the big screens on them, so that you could, so that we can have videos and all the rest of it in. Without liquid crystal displays, they would not have been developed because there was no lightweight, small type display. So the display itself has enabled a lot of these technologies that we sort of take for granted now, and really have revolutionized the way we work and live and use devices. I mean, they're in car dashboards, fridges, virtually everything, calculators, everything seems to have a liquid crystal display, or at least did until more recently. So now the liquid crystal displays have been taken over by light emitting diodes, so LEDs. So when you go and buy a TV now, you probably see it as OLEDs, OLEDs, or maybe even QLEDs nowadays as well. It's interesting because the reason why a lot of research was put into liquid crystal displays is because at the time you couldn't make efficient blue LEDs. So you can make red and green LEDs, but not blue LEDs. So couldn't use them for a display, couldn't use them for white light. So what happened in some scientists in Japan did research and eventually came up with a blue LED. And they actually won the Nobel Prize in 2014 for this work. And I was just looking at this beforehand on the Nobel Prize. What it says is, the quote that they give when they give out the prize, they said they succeeded where everyone else failed. And I thought that was a really interesting quote, because what it said to me is these scientists, they were determined to find a way to get a blue LED, and it's revolutionized displays. I mean, in that now, we virtually every TV now you buy is an LED. In new laptops, chances are it's with an LED. And also light. Our light bulbs now use LEDs. These last much longer, they use much less electricity, and they are a significant impact on reducing our energy for and therefore help with climate change. So there was maybe it was about 10 years ago, roughly, everyone was changing their light bulbs from tungsten sort of filament bulbs into these LEDs to reduce their energy consumption. So that's the impact of the work I was doing a long time ago in LCDs. But LCDs, liquid crystal displays, have had a big impact on the devices we use and the way we work and live. And LEDs have also had a big impact, particularly unsung, I think, perhaps enough, is in the amount of electricity we use and the energy we use in light bulbs. So that was the sort of first part of my career. And then I changed my research and started, I was interested in astrophysics. So actually I got interested in astrophysics through just studying myself, doing online courses and online studying. And I got very interested in astrophysics and cosmology. And the reason, so I'm a physicist. So what interests me about astrophysics is that it's the questions that are still unanswered. Now we do a lot in, I mean, there's a lot of very fascinating work going on in terms of using the physics, making new devices, AI, computing, all the rest of it, and a lot of interesting work in physics, like in CERN and particle accelerators and all that sort of thing. A lot of research going in physics in fusion reactors and getting nuclear fusion. But the thing that interests me about astrophysics is that there are a lot of unanswered questions. And when you're a researcher, the key thing to really identify is, what is your research question? What is the hypothesis you're putting forward that you want to answer? And the research question that I'm interested in is, what is dark matter? So when I do a research talk on, or a talk on the work I do, I often start off with, well, we have a model of the universe, and we call it the lambda CDM model. That stands for lambda cold dark matter model. And this is our sort of working model of how the universe started with the Big Bang, and then the universe expands, and within the universe we have dark matter and dark energy. The dark energy makes the universe expand a little bit, accelerate the expansion, and then as the universe expands, stars and galaxies evolve until we get to today. And that's a really good model, and it seems to work quite well, except for three things. We don't know what the Big Bang is, we don't know what dark matter is, and we don't know what dark energy is. Other than that, it's really good. So I often start my talks like that. And you might think, well, why do we then have that model? Well, we have that model because it's the best one that answers the questions answers, the questions and the observations that we make. So when we look out in the sky, and we look out into space, and we look at stars, and we look at galaxies, we can we actually see what it looks like. So you have to have a model that matches your observation. This is what makes us a scientist. Scientists, we don't just make up random models. We don't make up random things. We have evidence for things that we believe in, if you like. The things that we say, yes, this is how it works, are evidence for the models that we create of the universe, or whatever we're looking at. And it's really important that we make our observations or experiments and match what we're doing to that. And so the Lambda CDM model comes out of matching the observations to we look at the observation, we say this theory meets a lot of those, it can explain a lot of those observations, but not all of them. Of which, so when we say, well, dark matter can explain quite a lot of what happens. But the trouble is, we don't know what dark matter is. We know the properties it needs to have. So we know, well, we can't see it. That's the reason why it's called dark. It doesn't interact with anything, doesn't interact with other matter, normal matter, the matter that we see around us, other than by gravity. So actually we can see it through how it's influenced, through the influence of gravity. So that's really where my research is focused. So we can look at where dark matter is by looking at the gravitational lensing of very large matter in the universe. So let's look at a galaxy, or look at a galaxy cluster, and light as it comes to us will get deflected by that large mass. Gravity actually pulls the light to it and changes its direction, and we can see those changes. So we make observations, we look at how the light is being deflected by gravity, and where the big bits of gravity are, the big mass producing lots of gravity, you get more light deflection, and we can map out across the sky where the dark matter is. So what we're interested in doing once we have that map, which we've got, is to say, well, how does that compare with where galaxies are? And we're getting, at the moment, there's lots of telescopes going up in the sky, or new telescopes being developed that are big telescopes, giving us lots of data on galaxies and stars, and hence the reason why I do a lot of data science, because I have to analyze all that data. So, you've got Hubble telescope, the James Webb telescope. I'm sure you probably heard of those. They produce lots of data. So going back to the dark matter map, so we got a map of the dark matter from the gravitational lensing, and then we want to map that with our galaxy map, and from that see how galaxies map with the dark matter, how different types of galaxies develop within where the dark matter is, and in this way building up a picture and an understanding of how dark matter relates to how the universe has evolved and how galaxies form. So that really all comes from the question of well, that leads into the question, what is dark matter? And there are other, I don't really work specifically on what is dark matter. I work more on where is dark matter and how has it influenced how the universe has evolved and how galaxies have formed. But key question, what if dark matter, until we can really say, yes, we understand what it is, and have an idea whether it's a particle or something else. That will still be a big open question for our standard model of cosmology. So what do I do on a daily basis? Mostly sit at a computer, but not only sit at a computer. So there's a lot of coding, a lot of creating plots and analyzing data, doing some statistical analysis. But then also, as a researcher, that research is very international, and you get to travel around the world. It's one of the really good things about research. You do get to travel around the world. But publish papers, apply for grants, attend conferences and seminars around the world, publish some patents as well, talk to other researchers. I talk to the public as well, do some outreach work and communicate what I'm doing. I've written a book. It's called Cosmological Clues, about the evidence for dark matter, dark energy, and the Big Bang. And I write articles for the general public. And I've written an article on wormholes for the conversation. The conversation's very good, actually. It's sort of freely look at it online, but it published all different sort of research-based comments and articles, which is nice.
Perhaps you could post a link in the chat, Carolyn, to the conversation.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay,
that's it.
Brilliant, thank you. There's so much in there, and it's that you won't get to the answer, that you will keep researching and building research upon research. And eventually we'll hope to get to the answer, but it's such a big question. It's such a big question. And it was really interesting as well, your the quote around the Japanese researchers and the Nobel Prize, which relates back to what I've just said, because they said the team succeeded where everyone else failed. And it's more likely that they succeeded because everyone else failed, because the research builds upon the research. And without those steps, they wouldn't have succeeded at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fascinating. We've got a couple of questions that were sent in advance. I haven't seen any more questions come up in the chat, so it'd be really great to have some more questions coming in from the schools. And I have some questions myself. But let's start with the ones that were sent in. A very sort of general one, which was, which universities help to drive innovative research? And I'd like to say that all universities do, but sort of specifically from Hertfordshire, Essex, and from ARU. What do you think it is about your universities that help to drive innovative research? So if I can go first to Aled, please.
Thanks, Jenny. Very good director of our research office, obviously. I think actually, in terms of innovation, because the thing about innovation is that there's probably two types. One is very traditional engineering, which sits inside particular labs, and a lot of that has been going on in universities around the world for centuries. I think the place where it's really interesting at the moment, and this is something that ARU does do particularly well, is the flexibility around disciplines. So it's the ability to talk to people in life sciences or in engineering or in business or in health, and we're much less constrained about having to make sure that our particular discipline produces that output, because where innovation really is coming from at the moment, the real innovation that's going to transform the world is in that cross-discipline, those cross-discipline areas. So I think that's really important for any university.
Thanks, Aled. Angela, you anything to add to that?
No, I agree. I think different universities, again, have different departments, and at Essex, we can work quite nicely with computer engineering and even the sort of collaborations between life sciences and the robotics team. There's a colleague of mine that is innovating tiny little nano robots to deliver a treatment for cancer, which is absolutely fascinating. And I don't think that you would get that collaboration necessarily coming out of industry, because you wouldn't have those two people working together in, you know, a daily sort of office space. So I think that industry is good, but also the opportunities for different ideas and people coming together in a collaborative environment. I just second what Alida said. It's, yeah, without academia, you wouldn't really have that, I don't think.
Thank you, Angela. What about you, Carolyn? What drives innovative research at the University of Hertfordshire?
Yeah, definitely the cross-disciplinary look, and so you can. So in my department, we have physics, we have astrophysics, we have maths, we have climate change, we have data science, and in our school we also have computing and engineering, and there's a whole range of research that crosses the disciplines, and as Angela said, that can happen much easier in universities. And I also think there's a combination of the sort of fundamental research that you don't know is going to be useful until maybe sometimes it can be 50 or even 100 years later it becomes useful. But when electricity was being researched, no one really knew it had much of a use, and now we couldn't live without it. So building up from being able to do that sort of fundamental research and then building it into more applied research as well, and cross-disciplinary, and then there's a lot of work in universities to take it into industry and companies. As you know, as Angela sort of working in that area of getting that research out and used as well.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And it does bring me to one of my questions, which is really for Angela, around the length of time it takes from doing your research in the lab to the point where you are helping to diagnose cancers in the home. You know, what kind of steps do you need to take, and how long do those steps take?
Yeah, so this has been a sticking point for a very long time. Unfortunately, from sort of idea, sort of conception, all the way through to reaching a patient in a clinic, most treatments take at least 20 years. That's a very long time. And if you think of it in terms of cancer, or, you know, any disease that's taking lives, that's an awful lot of lives lost in that amount of time. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to shorten very much because of the processes that you have to go through to get sort of treatments into patients, obviously. And they are needed. Obviously, clinical trials where you make sure that you're not going to treat somebody for one thing but kill them because of something else is really important. And we've seen, you know, I don't know if anyone's aware of things like thalidomide, I can't even say it right now, but that was a treatment that was supposed to be for pregnant women to stop their morning sickness, and it got sort of almost rushed through to patients, and it resulted in lots of children being born with deformities. So although their mothers weren't getting sick, the babies were actually being seriously harmed. So there is a reason why it takes so long. It also takes an enormous amount of money, to billions of pounds, to develop therapeutics, especially for cancer. So I think in terms of diagnostics, it can happen a little bit quicker, which is a good thing. I actually worked during the pandemic at King's College in London as a researcher, and I was developing diagnostics for COVID. And in that situation, it's actually really, it's one thing that you can thank the pandemic for, is the way that diagnostics have now progressed because of the pandemic. So before that, the only lateral flow we ever saw in a home diagnostic sense was the pregnancy test. It wasn't deemed that it's, you know, people weren't sort of clued up enough to be able to test themselves at home for things, and was the viewpoint of a lot of policymakers. And now COVID has changed all of that. So we are seeing things starting to change, and thankfully, yeah, diagnostics can be developed a lot more quickly now.
Thank you. And Aled, I know that you need to rush off and leave for another meeting at 2 o'clock. So there was a question which I think is best answered by you, if you don't mind, that was sent in beforehand, which was, how can individuals be more sustainable as they go about their daily work and grind?
Yes, very good question. It's probably a very long answer, but I'll try and keep it short. So I think actually, I mean, to be really sustainable, we do need the system to change around us. So the most important thing is to talk to people in places of influence. So that's, you know, local councillors or politicians, to try and get them to change the system, because there is only so much people can do individually. And showing support for real transformation and change is the best thing we can possibly do. Having said that, there are obviously the individual actions that everyone does that add up to make significant changes around recycling, around what we eat, and thinking about looking at the labels of where things come from, what their carbon footprint is. There's so much information out there now about the energy efficiency of products, whether we really need to be traveling in particular ways, travel choices. So those sort of purchasing habits can make a big difference. And it also sends a signal to companies that people do want change to happen. You know, what we've seen over the last 5 years in the food system is a massive change that the industry didn't expect, away from meat towards more plant-based diets. And that was people power changing that. And that's meant the market and businesses have had to radically change and innovate new products and new things that allow people to have plant-based diets, which hugely reduces the impact on climate change. And that was completely people power. It was individuals saying, I'm just going to eat less meat.
Thank you. So it's a very clear message there that individually we can each take responsibility and act in responsible ways. There is a question from Helen in the chat around students considering to go to university. Are they likely to get involved with real research as part of their undergraduate studies? I know at ARU we run an undergraduate research internship scheme. So we offer to the companies in our Arise Innovation Centres and more broadly the opportunity to work with an undergraduate who will get involved in a research project with them under supervision. So it's certainly possible at ARU, and I assume at Hertfordshire and at Essex there'll be similar types of opportunities for undergraduate students to get involved in research. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Carolyn and Angela?
Yeah, so our undergraduate students to do a project. I think this will be true in virtually every undergraduate program, but at the end of your 3 years you do a project which is a research-based project and can be quite linked to the research that your tutors and the lecturers are doing in the university. So when you're looking at universities or which one to go to, look at what research they do, because that's where the expertise of those teachers are going to be, the lecturers, and also where you could do some research in your projects. And also we try very hard to bring our research into our lectures. I can't always do that because you do need the basic stuff as well to be able to understand. But I think every lecturer will be bringing their background and their research at some point into it, even if it's just sort of very briefly saying, and this is what I do. And sometimes it's more than that. So yes, there is, and there's clubs and all sorts of things as well. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, we have weekly seminars on research topics, and undergraduate students can come along to those as well.
Brilliant. So there's some great opportunities for undergraduate students to get involved, and also lots of public engagement from universities now as well. So even if you're not planning to go to university, the opportunity to go to the campus and hear about some of the research that's taking place is also there, through things like the British Science Festival, and at ARU we recently run the Chelmsford Science Festival, which was attended by around 8,000 people, which was wonderful. If there are any further questions, I don't see any. Would you like to say something about the competition, Helen?
Yeah, just if any students have completed a project in the last sort of year, we're doing a research and innovation competition. There are cash prizes, so the details are in the chat. And also for year 12 students, there's the opportunity to take part in a research placement for 2 weeks in the summer. So if you Google Nuffield research placements, we can find there are certain criteria that you have to fulfill, but do have a look at that if you're interested in doing research ahead of university. It's a fantastic thing to be able to put on your UCAS application that you've completed some research in advance. So do consider Crest Awards. We can link you up with a mentor for a project if you've got something that you really would like to look into. So we would really encourage you to get, researching on whatever topic you're really curious about and you're passionate about, because as you can see from the panelists, there's so much cross-disciplinary research that goes on at universities and outside of universities, and often links to companies as well. So it's a fascinating area, and it's a whole career within itself. So do consider it as a career as well. So thank you, Jenny, our chair, and to Carolyn, Angela and Anid. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it's been really, really interesting. And we will send the recording to schools afterwards with the links. So thank you all for joining us.